think that's a pretty wild setup for your talk.
This is for the early crowd. This is, you guys get to see how I get ready. I literally, right before this, reviewed, I'd seen it once before. I was watching Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I love that movie.
Yeah, and I was just like, that was a good, like, brain exploder for this conversation, like set me up for the conversation. Lots of things to think about, but definitely like a really great encapsulation of a lot of different, I guess, time paradoxes and theories. I'm not necessarily into the science of it, but you know,
putting an interesting narrative around it.
Yes, exactly. So don't ask me any hard-hitting science questions if anybody's like, super hardcore into that stuff.
Real deep, real fast.
Yeah, I was like, I have no clue. Yes, that's the part. Sitting at the surface, it's interesting to delve into. And I'm excited to try to go further, but for now we're just kind of skimming the top of possibilities.
Well, y'all don't know this, but I'll tell you, we do this every time we sit down with Brooke. We have a kind of a pre-conversation before we have a conversation.
I'm a talker.
But it's really been a lot of fun working with Mom, also known as Brooke Cheney. And just a few things about Brooke. Y'all know she's a professional artist. She's been making a lot of really great work nationally here in Texas, but also in other states, and making murals happen in other states. She's created artwork for a lot of national brands, as well as worked in her local community. She is the co-founder of the award-winning artist co-op and studio Trade Oak Cliff. If you don't know about them, look them up. They're really wonderful. They have all kinds of classes, and they're a great community, local artist-led space. And Brooke's work has also been featured throughout DFW, including in this year's Aurora Art Quest, as well as the Creative Arts Center, where I believe you did a residency. Is that correct?
Yes, we had a little solo show that ran for part of the summer, and I also hosted a mural camp for 6th through like 11th graders. It was pretty fun.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, their first mural ever.
And you showed your work at 500X Gallery, but also you juried one of their shows.
Yeah, I had a cool full circle moment with them. When I first entered the artist community, I had just quit my teaching job in the fall of 2020. I was teaching IB art for a couple of years for high school, 9th through 12th grade. And I was being introduced to the artist community as an adult for the first time in Dallas and didn't really know anyone. And if y'all don't know, 500X is the
oldest artist co-op in Texas.
Yes, and so it's an artist-run space and gallery, and I was in a show called Expo 2020, and then maybe just a year later, I was actually the juror for the show, so I got to select the people who were going to be a part of the show, and it was cool to have that full circle moment.
And you've also had a solo exhibition recently at Pencil and Paper Gallery, which is a local gallery. Also check them out. And if y'all haven't heard of Meow Wolf, which I kind of feel like you probably have because they're pretty big, that just opened in Grapevine, and they just opened one in Houston too. They're so fast. They're getting faster at building these things.
I was shocked.
But Brooke also has a mural there at the Grapevine, Texas location, The Real Unreal. So check it out if you haven't gone yet. It's really fun to go to Meow Wolf, and it's especially fun when you get to go and you see the artist whose work you know in the space, and you can kind of point them out and then tell other people.
Yeah, especially because the space is so, wild and on theme, non-linear. And you can, have so many different adventures there. So I think when you run into someone that you're familiar with, it's nice because you have this sort of orientation now, and you can ground yourself, and you're like, I know this person, and you can share that with other people, and then move on into the depths of whatever everyone else is doing. There's so many artists in there too.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
So first I want to start off with saying how much I appreciate after working with you on this show, your attention to the detail of not only the individual works, but also the layout of the exhibition. When Brooke came in for our first meeting about her solo exhibition, she came in and she looked at the space and she took lots of photos and made lots of notes, sat in here for a while. And then the next meeting we had, she came in and she had this whole plan laid out, and she had her iPad, and you had like all these details kind of already figured out about the show. And that was months before you actually started making the final pieces. I think you might have had that painting already started, or maybe not.
No, yeah, it was that one.
Yeah. But because of that, I also appreciate how you've given the viewer, because of those, a unique experience, encouraging us to consider the concepts in your exhibition, which are time, memory, and then also want to add the space within and around the work. You do that in a lot of different ways, starting with the formal elements that you use in your work. For example, when we talked about the installation, in the beginning, you came in and you said, I definitely want that painting right there. And y'all, the title of that painting is Point of Entry. So I was like, perfect title, great title. And you're putting it in, you put it in directly in the viewer's line of sight. And then Brooke made the decision to put these two walls here. So you're really seeing that piece as the first piece when you walk in. And can you talk about more about how you're connecting us with this aspect of time through the layout of the exhibition?
Yeah, so when I came in and looked at the space and started considering how I wanted to lay things out, something that I think about is how the viewer will experience the work. What, piece will they see first? Which direction will they go in? I like a little bit of that psychology. I don't dig too far into it. I just use my intuition and, patterns of human nature. Like, for instance, reading from left to right. We have this really open space here where you're being encouraged to follow the walls, and more than likely, you're gonna follow the work from left to right. So you have that sort of linear experience with the work. And so knowing that, I kept a lot of the work along the edge of the gallery, repeating some elements so that you're kind of hopping from space to space with some sort of connection from one piece to the other. But then also consider the idea of cyclical and or like nonlinear time, and how could I break up the space to encourage people to maybe not only follow that linear, sort of walking path, but to encourage them to cut across the gallery, maybe to loop through it a couple of times, again, referring to, cyclical and nonlinear nature in time. And so I added this arch piece, which you'll see throughout the works that it's, kind of flat, and then we get into some little relief elements where pieces are, sort of jutting out from the wall, and then we get to this where we also have physical pieces out in the space, and then we have an actual three-dimensional form at the center of the gallery. I think that with themes of temporal displacement, not in a sci-fi sort of way, not like traveling to different dimensions of time, but just personally feeling a sort of disconnect from maybe like one day to the next, 1 month to the next, depending on what's going on, because I'm a very like present focused person. I have a blurry view of the past and not a lot of energy for projecting into the future in a dreamlike sort of way. So yeah, I wanted to encourage people with a three-dimensional element to cut through the space, something that would sort of beckon them and again, encourage a different way of maybe exploring the gallery.
And so you mentioned the temporal displacement.
Yeah.
So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. I've been kind of listening to some various podcasts about time and about dreams, and we kind of had a little conversation about this too. And I said, "Wow, I really have this weird thing where I have deja vu a lot." And then, then after like researching that, I got into like time slipping. And then so thinking, and all of this, and the point of all of this was like to think about Brooke's work on a more personal level, I guess, and how I relate to it. So we talked about deja vu, and we talked about like the kind of repetition of forms that you have in the gallery. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so when I first started the work, I didn't really have any idea of what I wanted the concept to be. I was just working with the very limited language and sort of alphabet that I've created for myself, from the colors that I use to the shapes of the lines that are being used in the work, and I just sort of scramble them around to create new compositions. And when I want to experiment, I just try to add maybe one or two things, very controlled. So one of the first pieces that I started working on, I think like right before you actually asked me to do the show, was Point of Entry, the piece at the beginning. And I was working on the piece really intuitively. I wasn't thinking much about a concept. And I just got a lot of response when people would enter the public studio that I work out of, Trade, which is where I was working on this piece. And I don't do that very often. I tend to work on the stuff at home. But I was working on this in public, and a lot of people were responding to the space that's in the work. And I felt like it was unfinished. A lot of the work before had been, I think, cluttered with a lot of design elements, that being mostly striping, which is sort of my signature at this point. But looking to practice a bit of restraint and pull away from that, I wanted to experiment with what it would be like to see the work without stripes riddling the entire thing and kind of creating more of a optical illusion than maybe just letting the viewer breathe visually. So with that being said, I wanted to, keep the element of the striping just for my personal signature, but I do paint in a hard edge style, which has followed me from the beginning of my career to now. And I wanted to add some sort of dimension to the work. A lot of it's very planar, it's very flat and solid, and I wanted to know what it looked like with implied dimension being painted with actual dimension, where maybe pieces are hovering or are actually three-dimensional at some point. So a lot of the pieces that you'll see repeat through the work because, one, I like to work in that controlled and experimental way where I hold on to one new thing and I try it and see what the response is from not only myself but the audience. And thinking about time, I obviously have a lot of these thresholds in the work, whether they're these kind of square door openings or, this sort of arch form. We've been referring to them as portals, which I think can be a bit of a trite word. I try not to overuse it, but it is what it is, right? They're thresholds, they're doorways, they are portals. And thinking about that temporal displacement and kind of, again, I'm a very present focused person, and a lot of my life right now revolves around art. And so whether it's a personal project or maybe it's a job that I'm working on for a month, I get sucked in. I'm like blinders. And so I have this experience of sort of knowing where I am, feeling grounded in what I'm doing, and waking up one day when that thing is done and not knowing where I am. So I have these sort of symbols of transition or evolution, right? These transitory symbols or spaces that jump from piece to piece, that sort of connect the work formally or visually, but you're landing in a different place every single time you look at a new work. So I think that the portals are connecting the work, also again referring to themes of time, and then these sort of tree forms that have popped up recently. So I don't know if this is like subconscious influence, but when I was working on Meow Wolf, their whole theme is portals, right? Jumping to new universes. And it was the first time that I ever used these sort of tree-like, or what other people refer to them are as like cacti-like forms. And so just repeating those things again in the work kind of adds this uncanny nature where you're seeing similar or even sometimes the same exact shape throughout the work, but again, you're in this new place, passing through this new threshold, maybe taking old experiences with you and seeing them again, old feelings and seeing them again. Just again, sort of thinking about broken time, linear time, cyclical time, whether that is literal, mental, emotional, not to get too heady.
You pretty much just answered my next question.
Okay, yeah, it's like hard to explain, and I was hoping I wasn't going to ramble too far, but
no, that's wonderful. Yeah, because you got into like the portals and the conceptual framework of the show, and I think that's important. It's really important, and you talked about the origins as well. But I had already given you this, so you knew it was coming.
I thought too hard about this, y'all. I told y'all I prepped with watching Everywhere, whatever.
Everything, Everywhere, all at once?
Yeah,
yes.
See, it's too much.
I feel like you watch that movie a couple of times and still get something.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch it more. I hadn't seen it since it came out, and I really don't think I saw it when it came out.
Right. There's so much going on.
Yeah, I was at Texas Theater with friends and stuff, probably had a drink or something, just like didn't have a very clear experience.
Well, let's talk about, I guess, get into a little bit more of your brain. And because you refer to the work as imaginary, and they're not all landscapes. There's some that are like kind of interior scapes. But thinking about I've been thinking a lot about traditional landscape painting and photography. And in reference to memory, how does your personal experience inform the work? It's kind of like when you go to a place, you see something or you photograph it, if you're traveling, or even if you're just like going to a nearby space.
Yeah, so I think that personal experience and memory obviously inherently influences what you do, whether it's conscious or subconscious. For this work, I think that it's a little bit of both, and honestly, I think all the time it's a little bit of both, because I tend to make things and then look back at them and make connections. I don't work from like beginning to end. I think that was maybe inherited from being a teacher and doing like backward planning, where you have your objective at the end of the semester or the year, and you try to kind of count your steps backward to see how you're going to get to that endpoint. And then the brain just went off. Refresh my memory.
How your personal experience informs the work.
Yeah, so the way that I plan, I think the teaching thing definitely informs the work, but also you were saying like maybe places that you visit or things of that nature. I definitely take lots of pictures of my phone that tend to really go nowhere and don't inform too many things intentionally. But I think when I see lately standout moments of like really simple and geometric architecture, very open spaces, like recently in the spring of this year, I went to Big Bend with a group of friends. Just seeing that kind of expanse, I think probably inspired me opening up the work a little bit and going into it, because prior, I'm not much of a traveler. I don't travel very often, but now with the work taking me to other states and just trying to be a little bit more open with the idea of travel, so that I can inform my work but also inform my life, I think that the work has also become a lot more immersive. in that way, where I'm stepping into these spaces physically in reality and can maybe picture or feel more inspired in how it would feel to be inside of them, so I can create a more accurate depiction of this made up space that I've created, but still harness maybe the feeling that I intend for it to have. So yeah, I think that the personal experience has definitely inspired a lot of the work, even simple stuff. Like I recently moved from East Dallas to Oak Cliff in the past year or so, and the place that I'm in now has a lot more space. It's a bigger house, there's more corners, there's more architecture, but also my studio space has more room to breathe. I tend to surround myself with lots of just visual paraphernalia and stimulant because I like that sort of some subconscious inspiration that I get from something, so you don't have to force it. But I think now with my personal surroundings, the activities that I'm choosing, I'm gardening now, so I think that also provides a lot of mental space. So I think that these things reflect the physical space, but also the mental space that I feel like I've been in recently.
You mentioned expansiveness, and I just want to make a comment about that. So obviously in some of these pieces, there's a lot of space. So especially there's like this expanse in that one, and there's even like expanse like going into the piece of that that one, the point of entry. I'm gonna forget all the titles, y'all.
That's okay.
I'm not in her brain, not in Brooke's brain. But also, you know, thinking about the expansiveness of time. And you have, if y'all will notice when you walk around and look in the gallery, there's a few places where I think Brooke is, well, she's successful at it all. But there's one particular piece that like, you know, we all notice like right at the beginning. And it's this piece right to the right of the painted pole. And if you look into the, what I guess we're calling portals, but that might change later. And you look at that floor, or kind of a floor-like space, and then you can see that there's like this little kind of painted, like there's something around the corner. And so I think you're giving us that feeling through your use of the compositional element of space, right? Or principle. And you're making us kind of feel that expanse of time in that way as well, because it's like you know you're going somewhere, but you just don't know where. So that gives you that feeling of like forward movement. So I think that's really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely journey and travel is always sort of on my mind when I think of the work. I think just inherently because it's like landscape travel, you know, I can't really escape it, but I've had to try and find a way to maybe interpret that not so literally into, you know, a more esoteric version of travel or journey. Definitely in the work, something that I wanted to capture that I was personally focusing on with my relationship to time. So I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, but
I don't think so.
like I said before, when I first started creating some of the work, I didn't really have a theme in mind. But as I was working, I was, of course, considering, you know, the timeline that I have. And when I work, I really start having lots of conversations with myself and, you know, going off on little tangents in my head. And I happen to be just perusing the internet about time and portals and, you know, things of that nature. And I ran into a blog. I can't remember the name at the moment, but this guy was talking about linear and cyclical time and how that can be interpreted through religion. You know, just kind of straightforward and not to get too into it, the idea of like Western culture and religion sort of being a little bit more abrupt and having more of a linear sort of timeline where we've got like a beginning, middle, and end, right? You live, you die, and whatever is after. But it may be in some, you know, Eastern religions or culture, things are a little bit more cyclical and things come back around when you think of ideas of like reincarnation. And so aside from, you know, the religious aspect, I started to question how else would maybe the perception of time for one person determine the way that they live their life, the way that they remember, the way that they aspire or dream. And in my case, I think the thing that was under investigation, the characteristic that I was thinking about was work ethic, because I'm working on my work. Everything's very meta and self-involved with me. So the work is about the work, right? But yeah, thinking about pursuit and aspiration, maybe fear, having objectives. And so throughout the work, you'll see that there's this sort of red mound, or I call it a red dot, even though it tends to be at a half in every piece, that it appears in. And that is sort of, I guess, the symbol or the icon for me that represents that objective, that aspiration, that fear, whatever that next thing at the edge of the threshold is for you to pass into like another part of your life or evolve in some kind of way. And that could be very mundane and simple, you know, just like doing the dishes. Or it could be something really broad, like having a baby, or, you know, like getting married. But again, for me, it's more about work ethic. So when I considered this element around the gallery, I was really thinking about how when I'm work focused, I'm a very linear thinker, and I think that that's very powerful when you have an objective to meet, right? You have a middle, beginning, and end. You're probably maybe a little bit more organized, and you have the foresight of what you want, and you can go straight for it. That's usually how I am, hence the name of the show. I don't dream about the future. If I'm interested in something, I immediately find tangible steps to get to that point. And not to say that dreaming is a negative or that it's a weak point, because it's not. You know, it's just something that I don't necessarily excel in. But yeah, just kind of looking around the gallery at the red dot and considering if that is something that pushes or pulls you away from that piece, thinking about your personal narrative and how you interact with time, and I don't know, it all just gets kind of scrambled up there. But I don't even know if I answered the question. I told y'all it would yes. Like go off into some.
Yeah, you're covering. I feel like you're covering a lot of.
Okay.
I mean, we're covering a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And the conceptual framework of your exhibition. So I think it's really good, and hopefully we're giving y'all some things to think about, and y'all ask questions. So you've touched on the concept, you've touched on how you developed the idea for this exhibition, and your process. So considering that and the evolution of your work, your experimentation in this exhibition with dimension really stands out to me. How does play figure into your process? Because you talked about this a little bit whenever you were installing, and y'all watching Mom install was really, really fun for me, because I'm very interested in exhibition design, and so it was really fun to see Brooke kind of play around with things and, you know, make the decision to paint. By the way, that is a structural pole back there that's painted.
Striped one.
Striped. And Brooke made the decision to paint that. We've only had one other artist do that since I've been here, and I don't think it was ever painted before. So that's really, you know, fun. It's great because it's again doing that thing where it's bringing the work out into the space and giving the viewer that experience of time. I know you play a lot, so don't.
Well, I feel like when you call it play, like play is such a free word, and I feel like whenever I do these things, I called them like controlled experiments earlier, where I have this little bucket of elements or tools that I'm implementing in the work, and I might add like one little thing or two little things to it and kind of move them around to see how they work. But I think in this show specifically, play was a very big element because I'm at a turning point with the work. where I'm trying to explore new depths, both conceptually and formally. But yeah, I mean, like putting the pole, like bringing the pole into the space, but it's like not titled. It's not necessarily a piece. It's just an element of the work. By being within the space, maybe even could be considered an extension of, you know, the installation here, the sculpture here. I think that play can be a little bit scary because you're introducing new things into the work and you're not sure how they're going to pan out, or how they're going to be read. But with me considering, again, linear and cyclical and non-cyclical time and thought and things like that, I think that finding a balance between that sort of structured nature where I show up with, you know, a plan on my iPad and I know that there's going to be a piece in each space, but didn't have a clue of what each piece would be, is kind of inviting a more free or loose sense of like thought or creation. Sorry, the mic. We're not supposed to be touching these.
Yeah, I keep moving my hair because it's going to be making that scratchy noise.
Sorry.
Well, I just want to say too that you know,
Yeah,
play. I think we get confused when we hear play because we think it's like a very like loosey goosey kind of thing, but really like play is very productive. Even, you know, for children, little children who are playing, they're learning something. So while yours is very structured and you know, maybe so more so than other people's, it's still, you know, a kind of, it's still a play, there's still a playful part
Yeah.
in your work as you go through your process. Okay, I think I have one more question.
Okay.
And then I think we should let the people ask questions. And this is going kind of thinking about you as this like, you know, a lot of artists do this. You either like, you know, you have a day job or you do other things. But you also do, as I mentioned before, Mom also does murals and commercial work for various clients. When that work goes in a little bit different direction and it's more client directed, and it has you departing just a bit from your visual language, does that have any influence on your personal work or the future of how you, we don't dream about the future, but of the future of how you think about like using your materials or even like concepts?
Yeah, I definitely try to keep an open mind when I'm working for and with other people. I do I've been doing a handful of mural work. That's kind of the newer end of the business part of my art career. But also, yeah, creating canvases and designs, digital designs recently for different companies and entities. I know that when they look at the portfolio, there's a very strong sense of self and aesthetic. And I know that when I get hired, that, you know, they're probably expecting to get something close or relative to what I do. But when they do ask for things that are maybe out of my realm of comfort, I've always taken on the challenge and felt like there's very analytical at times, and I feel like there's always some sort of strategy or formulaic way to get to the end of that project, even if I'm unfamiliar. And I definitely keep myself open to the lessons that I learned when I'm creating that work and how maybe it can be later applied to some of the things that I do, maybe in more personal or like, you know, gallery exhibition focused work. For instance, the immersive nature of muraling, right? Before, I think a lot of the work, I was trying to cram a lot of information into the pieces, no matter what size they were, and felt there was a sort of emptiness when there wasn't a lot of that kind of patterning or design element involved. And once I started muraling, I had to get used to the practical nature of like leaving a lot of open space. You know, it just creates an easier experience. Sometimes it's quicker, and I think that that has subsequently translated into the work here and given me the confidence to experiment without all of the striping taking over the work. I think working in places where there is, you know, immersion or installation physically, like in Meow Wolf, or a more local version of that, Sweet Tooth Hotel. That was my first time working in an installation space where I built, you know, huge foam flowers that were like 12 feet tall and were sitting in the middle of the room. And I laid turf and I painted a mural and I sculpted 300 plus tiny little snails out of air dry clay. And, you know, all those different experiences definitely later inform the work. And yeah, I think that it's pretty easy to see if you have looked across the span of work that I've done in the last 4 or 5 years, that it's all kind of bled together and created a larger body of work, even though they're separate.
Okay. I think we can open it up for questions. Do y'all have questions? Yes. And do you mind using my mic? I'm going to hand it to you. Yeah, you can come up. Yeah.
Say it to me face to face.
I thought about this. When was the first time that you thought to yourself, man, my artwork is
Ooh.
That's a good question.
That's a good question. That is such a, I was not expecting a question like that.
Told you.
So, I mean, I think at all stages at some point, you like look down at the thing that you've painstakingly created over whatever amount of time, and you're like, yeah, like this is it, you know? When I make a work, the way that I know that it's finished, it's, you know, the very intangible way of doing it. Like I can just feel it. I can feel that it's done, right? But I think in the work personally, there's like the grid we've talked about and like the stability, and there's like this moment of stillness. So I feel like, you know, I've looked at a lot of things and felt that feeling of like, this is it, this is cool. But months later, I look back and I'm like, ooh, what is that, you know? And I have this like moment where I'm like, ooh, I've like evolved a little bit and maybe my taste has changed. So I think that's happened so many times over. Maybe the first time I ever really felt that confidence was potentially in college, making work. Delaney, I see you. She taught me in college, so she knows what my work was like, if y'all want to know. But yeah, I think I felt that feeling for the first time in college, but maybe professionally, it was when I painted my first landscape. It was February 2021. I had just quit my job teaching around like October 2020, and I had been making t-shirts and doing like made to order sweatsuits where I was using my screen printing background, and I was also using like heat transfer vinyl, and I was just trying to, you know, hustle little t-shirts and sweatshirts here and there. And we had that huge storm, that like snowstorm or whatever, in that February of 2021, and I just decided to paint something. I didn't want to inundate people with my little ads of like, hey, you know, you can get this little sweatsuit, and people's like, you know, power's going out and people are freezing and like hungry, and it just felt so trivial. So I decided to kind of go inward and work on something new. And I just talked to an artist, another local artist, and I was asking her, what do you do when you feel stagnant in your work? Because I didn't want to work on the clothing stuff. And she was like, oh, I just like do the same thing, but in a different medium. Simple as that. So I was like, okay, I've been making these kind of abstract landscapes out of these scrap pieces of vinyl. I'm gonna paint this. And so I painted my first landscape, posted it online, and I hate to admit it, but you know, the validation of others, it'll get you. So I think like at like career-wise, where I'm like super cognizant and can remember that exact moment, would probably be when I posted that first landscape painting back in 2021. Just seeing that people had a really large response to it, and then kind of rinsed and repeated, tried another composition. People like responded really well to that. I was like, oh, I should pay attention to this. Like, I might be onto something. So my work is kind of this this intentional and cognizant experience of creating something that I'm proud of, but also that I know other people will enjoy. Yeah. First landscape, college, Instagram. Yeah. Thank you for your question. That was good.
That was a really great question. I've never heard that question in
I
an
haven't
artist
either.
talk.
Usually it's like, how long did it take to make whatever? And it's like, oh, which if y'all have that question, that's totally fine. It's on the theme of time.
Yeah. Any other more questions? Come on. Yes.
Don't be shy.
I've got both a question and a comment, completely unrelated to each other.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was fascinating when you said that the sort of red semicircle or red dot in so many of the paintings is for you a symbol of like a goal or an objective or something that's sort of like at the end of a journey almost. Whereas like being landscape paintings, like I see it obviously as like a sun,
Yeah.
the sun setting.
Yeah.
But you connected it to this thing of like linear time, which is an interesting sort of like paradox with the sun setting obviously being very like cyclical. For you, it's something that's more linear, which is just, I don't know. I was like having trouble wrapping my brain around it.
Yeah, well, I mean, and even if you just like stop your thought to be like, there's a beginning and an end to the day, a sun can represent that beginning and end, but then we can't ignore the idea that they're like connected and it's literally just like looping itself.
It's also this loop, but then at the same time, like supposedly scientists, can calculate the end of the sun, and like one day it's going to run out of fuel and sort of like die on itself.
So it is linear. Yeah, right. It's just doing this until it explodes at the end, like, and that's why this is like kind of a funny topic. And I was a little nervous to talk about it because there's so many different ways that someone's brain can interpret this. But it's funny, yeah, that, before when I used the circle, it was just representative of the sun. And I didn't really put it on a horizon ever. I never, I didn't cut it off too often. It would just be like up there in the sky, whole. So funny, yeah, how that symbol or that little tool that I have, that letter, is being kind of re-implemented in a new way and has a weird sort of meaning behind it now that is contradictory and also, I don't know, valid.
Yeah, for sure. So my question, which has absolutely nothing to do with the comment that I just made, is in so many of your works, it feels incredibly sort of like structured and neat and sort of intentional, like within the landscape, sort of everything sort of has its place and there's sort of space around it, nothing's sort of like interfering with each other. I'm just curious if, going back to what you were saying earlier about like play and controlled experiments, do you ever try more sort of like an improvisational approach to compositions where things may not be as sort of like tidy as they are?
I feel like when I first started creating, it was a lot more improvisational. Like I used to take commissions at the beginning. That's how I discovered, I was like, ooh, I could like make money off of painting these paintings instead of just trying to make like a shirt here and there. And that process would look like, somebody contacts me, they ask me to paint something and I say, hey, what are like one or two either like specific places in the world or maybe just landscape styles that you're interested in, drawn to, that means something to you, and give me like one or two colors that you want included in the piece. And they would be like, okay, they would give that to me. I wouldn't send a sketch because I never did one. I never told them what the color scheme was going to be. I never like communicated anything. I would just take, those little bits of information and I would just make the thing. I would always start with just some fluid drawing and I would lay down, and when the drawing felt stable, or I don't know what it is about the grid thing. I never drew with a grid. I still don't draw with a grid. I think maybe working with like vector tools and, you know, doing the screen printing thing and like digital design stuff, the very minimal experience I had with that, I think maybe that influenced that, the way that the pieces sort of fit. So that sort of tidiness has always kind of been at play, even though I haven't necessarily chosen that. I'm glad it's an aspect of the work and I intentionally implement it now. But yeah, I think in the beginning it was a lot more innate in the way that I was creating, because I would, like I said, went off on a tangent, so I would start with like a color, the color that they wanted, and I would build around it. And the way I create that is that I just respond to, like, every action has a reaction. I'm very like formulaic about the work. So if I put down like a super saturated warm color, I may put down a desaturated cool color or a saturated cool color, or, you know, there's always this toggling of characteristics or elements of the elements that I'm using. But yeah, I don't know. I think that there was a little bit of innate creation, or like more intuitive creation, like with this installation piece. I literally just cut out random skate pieces and knew that I wanted to do something that was kind of long and low, where I separated the foreground and the background, had elements that were painted and also lifted off of the wall and on the floor. But I didn't know how I was going to organize them. And I literally created this composition the day that I installed it. So, you know, kind of keeping in mind some of the elements that I want to reflect from other pieces, and having a very loose idea of how I wanted this, the composition of the space, but I didn't necessarily know where each element would go. So that, I think it did happen, and it still does. It's just, again, still a little bit controlled. Thank you.
Do you ever create or install with an intent to evoke feeling in?
So yes, I do. I think my first experience with installation, going back to the Sweet Tooth Hotel thing, there was a very calculated attempt to make people feel small, not in a bad way. I was trying to figure out a way to say that. My installation essentially was that, you know, like there were all these environmental elements like trees and world flowers, grass, you know, nature, landscapes, and they were all larger than life. It was called Sky's the Limit, was the installation, and it was about being small and still being able to do big things. So I think um, starting with that experience, I immediately felt like I wanted to be very intentional about the spaces I was crafting. With a landscape, I think that they can be read as either very personal or impersonal, and I think at the beginning they were very impersonal for me, so the way to get close to them was maybe to be able to control the experience that other people had with them, so that I could say that there was intention there. So I think that, you know, starting out with that experience kind of opened my eyes up to the fact that I would like to be kind of in control a little bit, or have an intention of what people's experiences with the work. And so with this, the idea of space being this kind of polarizing feeling of being very vast and lonely and maybe dystopian in some kind of ways, but also like, you know, an open horizon represents future and possibility. And there's this sort of push and pull that happens with that intentional choice to create and leave space in the work. And so just little elements like color and maybe distance, like you said in this one piece, that just kind of like undiscoverable corner that you feel that sort of curiosity to want to poke your head around. Those things are definitely considered when creating the work, especially when it's so simple, right? Simple doesn't mean easy. And there's a lot of intention in the way that I want people to feel when they see it.
Yeah, and I think you know, even that piece that you mentioned, it could be like give someone like an ominous feeling. You know, it depends on the person. You know, and then in this piece, I mean, if you're like me and you're almost blind, you may not can't see it from here, but there's this tiny little figure, like a line, a mark with a shadow in that standing
Yeah.
marked. I'm attributing human qualities to it. In that great expanse. And so, you know, when I first saw that, I'm kind of a dark person, so it was both like lonely, but also kind of funny at the same time to me, that there's this one little mark there, and then there's a shadow. So it's sort of like, you know, oh, I'm lonely, or what am I doing out here?
It's a little absurd, right?
You know, it's very absurd. And then I think because you have these spaces, these thresholds, that has that kind of like mystery to it, and we really don't know what's next, right? I mean, we never know what's going to happen. We walk down the street, or we go to bed at night, or we're driving, or so there's this idea of like the unknown. I think in a lot of the space of your work, and I mean, even in this piece, which, sorry, some of y'all can't see, you'll have to come around and look at it if you haven't seen it already. But even in that piece where there's this kind of looming shape on the red half circle, and it's almost kind of like, you know, like standing over,
Stalking.
Yeah, like stalking, or it's you know, it's unsettling. Yeah.
So whenever you decide that you want to paint, do you ever paint on what mood you're feeling?
I don't think that I do intentionally. I find that a lot of your environmental stimuli definitely feeds in, you know, to the way that we behave, the way that we go about our day, the things that we create, the things that we say, you know, no matter how intentional we try to be. I don't think that I've ever, that I can recall, tried to reflect exactly what I was feeling at a moment. That's such a good question. That makes me feel kind of cold and emotionless. I'm like, do I experience emotions? I'm like, what? Trying to remember the last time I had one that I maybe.
It's all that structured.
Yeah, made something about. Yeah, right. I can't get over the structure. Sorry that it's so anticlimactic, but I don't think that I do. I find myself to be more of a practical person, and I think I put some of that like logic part of my brain and analysis before emotion. I think I was just kind of raised that way, and maybe it's, who knows, a defense mechanism against emotion. I don't know. I'll have to dig into that more. But yeah, I can't say that I have. Do you make art? Have you made things about the way you feel? Yeah. You don't have to share. I'm not trying to put you out there. Just curious. I'm glad you're making art. Definitely a great way to process feelings, for sure. I think I use mine to process thoughts more, which they overlap.
To follow up on that, do you feel good when you're making art?
Yes and no, right? Like in my case, the art can be for a deadline, for a job, for someone else, something maybe that I'm not, again, accompanied with normally creating. And so there's a lot of uncertainty and fear and pressure to do the right thing. And yeah, to come up with something that people enjoy. But I find that when I'm creating things more like this for like exhibition, that there is maybe more of a freeness or an openness, and I feel more settled because I'm in control of the direction of the work. So this is kind of that open, calm space in between all those conversations I'm having with myself when I work. Not that it all washes away. I think it intensifies, but for some reason it feels more calming than maybe like everyday, like inner conversations that are being had about exterior life.
Yeah. Oh, let's do her and then we'll do you. I promise.
So I have so many questions, so I don't want to waste your time.
No,
I'm
you're
out of funds.
no, you're good. I love it.
So my question is more about your entire career, from teaching to creating art, creating community, girls. I read about it online. And here's the reason I'm asking. So I have internship work in construction. Very boring. People talk in this economy, and it's okay. So we did a pretty good job with the internship program last year. So we had a good one. But what I noticed was a lot of people in college, they struggle with a lot of anxiety. Totally makes sense. That anxiety, depression, and they have community with each other, interacting. We had some things that worked, but in your experience, teaching art to murals, how do you create a sense of community, a sense of safety with these young people, and really communicate and speak to each other and feel safe? Talk about this.
I feel as though that I try to be genuine, which seems like such a blanket statement. But I think in a lot of those interactions, aside from maybe being nervous about being with each other and interacting with each other, they're nervous to, be having this experience, right? It's an internship. It's important. It's an experience where they get to potentially engage with the thing that they want to do in the future, which I think fear of the unknown definitely pushes people or keeps people away from attempting to do a lot of things. When I'm in those spaces, I am very vocal and very honest about not knowing everything. I feel like whenever I'm the authority in a room, people are most likely the most afraid of me or what my reaction is going to be in any situation. So I just try to communicate very openly and let people know that it's okay to to make mistakes, to not know things, and that this is an experience where you're getting to try something. It's okay to make mistakes. That's the only way that you're going to learn. But I think that's how I try to break down a bit of the barrier on the surface of those situations. Otherwise, just advocating for people, allowing people to acclimate to the environment and the situation at their own level while encouraging them to sort of step out of their boundaries a little bit, like pushing back and asking you a question, but not forcing you to keep, going back and forth. I mean, did you feel open in that situation? Did you feel nervous? Can I put you on the spot? You didn't feel nervous? Yeah, it's just like a chill conversation, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I think a lot of the way that I behave in those situations is just innate to the person that I am, but I do try to very intentionally create a safe and open space by being vocal. I don't know.
Okay, and then our hour is almost up, so I didn't want to. But I had one final question. I have a great question. So if I think her picture, your work previous to this most recent installation, my perception of the work is that it is flat. It's very flat. While there are layers, and we know that there is a landscape, and there's probably more beyond the landscape, it's pretty flat. There's a lot of integration of shadows and play on light and like casting. And I was wondering if you could kind of just speak on how you integrated the shadows, because my perspective, now we know the dot is not a sun. But like if I look at that piece in the middle, there's the dot, but the shadow is behind the pole. And so I just wanted us to just kind of talk about the integration of the shadows.
Yeah, so whenever I paint the work, you're talking about how flat it is. I think with that like already planted in my head that the work is flat. I've been working on it for years. When I paint those suns, there's never been like a light source. There's never been any indication of there being, yeah, like directional light or anything like that. And so I think when I created the work, there was definitely this this kind of disjointed or separated experience of it being perceived as a sun and then the light coming from like a different direction and casting shadow in the direction of what is being perceived as the sun. But I honestly like that element because I think it just kind of plays with a bit of the surreal nature of the scapes, and now you're questioning like which direction you're looking in, and is that the sun? And like, you know, I like that it sort of tosses things up in the air and keeps people questioning. But yeah, I knew that I wanted to implement shadow, and so I will go back on the fact that I said that that was like the very first thing in the show that was created. The very first work that was actually created, which was just like a sketch. I just wanted to see what it, because I have an iPad, I could sketch it on there, but I wanted to see what it was like, you know, tangibly with the paint and the wood, was the first small arc on the left with like the 3 forms and then the shadows are coming forward. That actually is a sun, and that was a very direct attempt at creating, you know, a realistic rendition of yeah, what the light casting or the drop shadows would look like. And when I decided that I liked that aesthetic and that the work looked good without the stripes and I could add a bit of dimension and it read as dimension, I started just throwing the shadows into all of the work without any regard for, again, the sun or the dot or whatever, you know, people are perceiving to be the light source. Yeah, dimension, time, shadows. Shadows move. It indicates time, the passing of a day. Bringing it all back.
And remember, these are from your imagination. So.
Yeah. So they don't have to make sense. And like I like kind of delving surface level into concepts and ideas, and even just the idea of the shadow without studying them too hard, so that I can maintain this intentional like naivety about the subject matter, so that I can create a more surreal or imaginary scape, because I'm a very rules-oriented person. Once something's set in my brain as this is the way it is, that's the way it is, and it's very hard for me to break away from that. So in cases where I'm exploring or playing with elements, yeah, I try to kind of skim the surface and implement them without too much interference or like influence from reality.
I'm not going to kick anybody out, so do you want to continue with if people still have questions?
Yeah, if y'all still have questions, if you don't want to do it in this format and you just want to get up and look at stuff and talk to me, I'm cool with hanging out for a bit and yeah, talking to people, whichever way y'all want to do it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your work with us, and we're recording this.
Got all my twitches on camera.
Yes.
How nervous did I look, you guys?
And all of my faces, like grimaces.
Yeah, I'm always like tucking my lips back, trying not to cut people off. I'm like.
Well, this was recorded, so we'll have it up on YouTube if you guys want to watch it again, and we'll share it.
Of course. Relive the moment.
Yeah, relive it. But yeah, Brooke will be here. We're going to put up the chairs as whenever y'all feel like getting up, you can get up, and then we'll do that. But thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much, because who am I? Y'all are so cool for showing up. I appreciate it. Thank you.